every time the president goes on national television and threatens Putin or anyone like Putin, everybody's eyes roll, including mine. We have a weak and indecisive president that invites aggression.
When a president of the United States says that that president is going to take military action and does not, that sends a message all the way around the globe.
Ow. Those comments from Senators Graham and McCain pointing to some lingering questions when it comes to how the U.S. and the West response in the Ukraine will be taken. Is President Obama in part to blame for what Moscow is doing? I don't really get that line, but that's the argument some are saying. And what can the U.S. really do, and what should we do? And before I get that, I just want to get, we know that there is a historical fight that's going on here, really as to, you know, the Ukraine, as to historically what part of Russia, I think that you very eloquently explained, but how much of this also has to do with gas?
Did he say the Ukraine?
I did.
He did say Ukraine.
But help me out here in that geographically,
right,
to get the black stuff to different parts of Europe that need it, and how the pipeline works and what it goes through.
So Europe, Western Europe, gets 30% of its natural gas from Russian pipelines. The majority of that gas transits through Ukraine. Right? 30% of all Russian exports of gas end up in the final market in Ukraine. That is, are used by Ukrainians. The rest transits on to Western Europe. There's no advantage for Putin to take over Ukraine, because then, if he say he owns Kiev, then he pays himself for the gas that right now Kiev is paying him for, right? And the pipelines to get to Western Europe still have to go through Ukraine.
But it would be better for him if it was a friendly government in Ukraine, wouldn't it?
It absolutely would be, yes. The question here is not, does Putin have an interest in a friendly government in Kiev? It's the extremeness of what he's doing to get that friendly government is actually going to have an opposite effect. It's going to push whatever government forms after this further west than it ever would have been before this happened. He is pushing Kiev into the European Union.
Another question I think that perhaps most people watching us tonight, besides the role of world policemen, policing the world, what interests, are there any interests of the U.S. in this situation?
The U.S. has a moral interest in maintaining that this is not the 19th century, that this is, hey, the 20th century, the 21st century, right? And we don't do this anymore. You can't just take over a country on a thin excuse like Putin is trying to do in Crimea right now. So that's our only interest. We have very little economic interest, almost zero military interest in the region. Our interest is in supporting the European Union and coming up with loan packages to get Kiev out from under the thumb of debt that they owe to Moscow right now. And then it really is a question of how close the European Union is going to let a future Ukraine get to full membership.
Can I just ask a quick question on that point, the moral argument? How much of Russian TV now is consumed by the argument that the U.S. has entered plenty of...
They kicked off the Oscars. The Oscars last night got kicked off because of this ongoing developments, and it's just really state-sponsored TV. Yeah. I mean, you believe, if you listen to what they're saying, apparently that the Ukrainians, that they had to go in because Nazi mobs had been taking over. They talk about bloodshed in the streets, and every eyewitness account from independent, unbiased reporters is saying, we don't see any of this going on. So, unfortunately, I think the state media, at least, can't be believed. I have a question. There'd been talks that they wanted to have the Ukraine join NATO. Let's say, hypothetically, the Ukraine was a member of NATO, and Russia took this action. Then what?
You know, it just points out you can't be casual about who's a member of NATO, because there's no way that we would respond militarily. But, you know, your clip, I was thinking, this is a test for the president. The test, the comparison I'd make is, the president's not only going to want to take action as our country, but how good is he going to be in getting other our partners to be in sync?
Reportedly, there's unanimity from all the G8 countries that they want to draw sanctions.
I wish him well. I mean, this is the key. The key is, how well are we working with our allies, and how good is the president and bringing them together? Not unlike what President Bush Sr. did in Kuwait. This is the test.
But Was it a cheap shot? And I don't want to spend too much time on Graham and McCain, because here's why I thought.
I'll interrupt.
Marco Rubio said, you got to be tough with him. He's the same guy who wouldn't authorize the use of force in Syria, and now he's saying you got to draw a hard line. So he's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't.
Well,
the president.
right now, this is a serious problem, and you know, I have my differences with the president, but you don't want to make it even more difficult for him, and you don't want to push him into doing something that's not healthy for our country.
And we agree militarily. He doesn't have a card to play, right?
Yeah.
I can't resist. I have to say this. Lindsey Graham and Senator McCain and anybody else who's saying this are showing nothing but their ignorance of international relations. The strategic situation that allowed Vladimir Putin to move troops into Crimea is the same no matter what President Obama says. What he does or doesn't do in Syria or Libya or anywhere else that they're claiming is the reason why Putin thought we were weak and thus he could move in. Putin did not go into Crimea because of anything President Obama did. He went into Crimea because he could, and he's got nuclear weapons. He can blow the world up if he wants.
Yeah, no, let me just...
That's what allows him to do what he wants militarily.
I disagree with my colleague from, from New Haven.
I'd say distinguished, but that's up to you.
The president, and then you laugh. the president, President Putin is taking a risk. He spent $53 billion on the Olympics because he cares about what the world thinks. So I don't think you can totally separate it. I do think he cares what the world thinks.
Okay, now talk about sanctions. And from what we've heard, there seems to be unanimity within the G8 here that they're going to draw a hard line. What can Congress do? What can the G8 do? And give an idea how that works here if it ties the noose around Russia that they can't really do business.
Well, I think the first thing is that Congress needs to sit down with the president and say, how can we help? You know, what can we do to help? This Congress needs to do it. Both the House and the Senate need to come together. Yeah, they do. This is serious stuff, and then map out a plan where they all are in agreement. That's the most important, because I do buy the fact that we could do something stupid, or somebody else could, and then it, you know.
You know, Merkel said something interesting. If you saw in the Times today, she reached out to Putin.
Who did?
Angela Merkel. And she said, the German premier, she said, I got off the phone, and I'm paraphrasing here, I don't think he's all there. Is there considerations that he's sly as a fox or that he's just off?
This is what I'm saying. Vladimir Putin is a smart man, he's a rational man, but his blind spot is Ukraine.
Yeah.
It is akin to what we've done when we said we want there to be a connection between Iraq and Al-Qaeda. And we were bound and determined to see that in the evidence. Vladimir Putin is doing the same thing for Ukraine. He is concerned that if Ukraine moves further to the west, if it becomes a full member of the EU, that it will become, first of all, a full member of NATO, and that NATO actually poses an existential threat to Russia, which even if Ukraine became a full member of NATO, which it almost certainly will not be, it still wouldn't pose an existential threat to Russia. It makes no difference if you have NATO troops on the Russian border. They're on the Polish border.
So let me ask you this question. Is he doing this kind of as a message that you don't want to make the Ukraine part of NATO because you won't be able to do what you're supposed to do? If NATO country is attacked, you got to respond.
Yes, I think that's part of it. I think if he is rational, or when he sort of has these moments where he comes back and says, I've really overplayed my hand here, right? The one thing that he's going to establish is the fact that NATO is going to say, well, we don't want troops there because he could come in with his troops at some future date. So what we'll do is we'll make Ukraine a Partnership for Peace country, which is NATO light, right?
Kind of like
not actual membership.
Kind of like Australia.
Kind of like what we did to Georgia.
I know I'm up
against Austria years ago.
Yeah.
Real quick question. We saw in the last week a debate, not really a debate, kind of a statement from the new defense secretary that we're going to have a leaner military. And de facto, our mission statements of military action will be different out of either necessity or out of fatigue, whatever. Is this just in a small way a reminder, not that anyone, a sane person, wants us to get involved militarily in this fight, that our role in the world is changing more than maybe we all acknowledge right now, that the amount of fights that we're willing to take, even moral fights, are different than maybe they were a generation, certainly a couple generations ago?
I don't think it's about the amount of fights. I think it's the type of fights. The United States has decided we're not going to put 100,000 troops anywhere in the world. And my generation, which is coming into power now, has taken that lesson from the last 14 years. So we're going to have a smaller army because that's what armies do. Armies occupy. You still have the Marines if you want to hit someone and pull back out. You have the Special Forces, which are the only, they're basically a branch of the military, separate from the other services now, but they're the only branch, if you will, that's growing. We already have about 70,000 Special Forces operators.
And don't forget drones. Yeah.
Right, and drones and these kinds of things. So it's not that U.S. power isn't important. It's not that we won't engage overseas. It's about how we will engage overseas. And we will not engage overseas for the foreseeable future with large ground forces.
Interesting. Good stuff. I'd say it's distinguished. Don't worry what it says. Yes. Matthew, thank you, Professor.
All right,
I appreciate it. Don't be a stranger. We'll definitely have you back. When we come back, we'll go from the intelligent back to the inane fighting. No, we will talk politics here, and it is the midterms. We're already starting to see strategies, and Jeannie will tell us not only what the numbers say, Dominic will give us an idea, and the congressman will tell us, I'm sure will tell us who's wrong and right, and Andrew won't keep his tongue. So when we come back here, Republicans and Democrats, what is their plan from now to November? Stay tuned.